Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Fahraaz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Well, it's a exciting but also a worrying time within the United States of America under the administration of Donald Trump. We start off with the worrying part, is that ICE agents continue to act in a manner which is against the Constitution of the United States of America, especially when it comes to the anti-immigration policy which has been enforced by the Trump administration. What we saw in this week was the abduction and the detaining of Sami Hamdi, a well-renowned British commentator and somebody who has been outspoken against the current genocide that is happening in Gaza. But on the optimistic side of things, New York City may see its first mayor of color, a Muslim, in Zohran Mamdani. And that, of course, would shake up the Republican-led Congress that we are seeing in Washington. My guest for today, we're going to be delving into the current state of the United States politics and, of course, U.S. aiding and abetting Israel in the current genocide in Gaza and the occupation of Palestine. Joining us, I'd like to welcome Edward Ahmed Mitchell. He's the Deputy Director on the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ahmed. Good to have you on. Shukran so much for joining us.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be with you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I think I want to, kickstart this conversation, Brother Ahmed. How would you sum up Donald Trump's United States of America currently from a Council on American-Islamic Relations at this very moment?
Look, the United States does not change significantly from president to president. For the most part, most American Muslims are able to live peacefully, to practice their faith freely in our nation, and so are people of other faiths. America is still a place where, for the most part, you can experience a level of justice and freedom and peace in your daily life. Having said that, what we have seen over the past 9 months is a significant threat to the values that in America we have come to expect, to the constitutional rights we have counted on. Especially for those people who are speaking up for Palestinian human rights. Even during the Biden administration, we saw targeted attempts to suppress college students who were speaking up against the genocide in Gaza. We saw students being brutalized in cities that were controlled by Democratic mayors. And that happened all during the last administration. In this administration, we've seen something somewhat different, which is the government's immigration officers going after anyone, especially immigrants, who have spoken up in criticism of the Israeli government's human rights abuses. Mahmoud Khalil was the first most prominent student who was abducted because of his criticism of the Israeli government. Then Rameza Ozturk, a female student in Massachusetts, was abducted, and there have been several others all targeted because of their speech on Palestine. They committed no crimes, were not accused of committing crimes. The government was essentially arguing that because they have said something that the government finds objectionable about our foreign policy and about a foreign government we support, that they can be kicked out of the country. Now, alhamdulillah, thankfully in America, we have the rule of law. We have lawyers who went to court, and Mahmoud Khalil is out free right now. So is Rameza Ozturk. So are pretty much all, not all, but most of the other individuals who were targeted for their speech. But this is an ongoing struggle. There are other issues we're facing across the country in terms of immigrant rights, in terms of free speech, in terms of justice and making sure our justice system is not weaponized. So there are other issues we're facing, but I don't want people to think it's a dystopia. It's not that bad. There are active threats. There are challenges we're facing, but alhamdulillah, the country is working to address this. And even amid all the challenges, there have been some positives coming from the administration as well, despite all the things that we disagree with. So it's not the end of the world here, but certainly there are challenges we're dealing with.
Yeah, Brother Ahmed, what's interesting about this is that even though you can see a push from the Trump administration and even certain Republican representatives to try and bring about this sort of dystopian atmosphere that you would see in the United States. My question to you is, how important is the Constitution, how important is the rule of law within the United States in really trying to make sure that Donald Trump does not create this sort of America that many of the Republicans are really wanting to see, this iron sort of curtain rule, this real aspect of having some sort of authoritarian aspect within the United States of America. Talk to us about that.
Well, first, let me note that even within the conservative movement in America, there is an intense debate going on. There are many conservatives, many Republicans, they're still in the minority, but it's a growing number of them who are tired of American taxpayer dollars being sent overseas to fund a foreign government's genocide. They are tired of seeing that we can criticize our own government, we can criticize Canada, Mexico, we can criticize anyone in the world, but not the Israeli government. So there are conservatives who are speaking out against this. There is a debate going on in, you could say, MAGA world about whether or not it's truly America first or Israel first. Having said that, absolutely the Constitution, the rule of law, is critical to making sure that the worst plans that extremists on the Israel first side of that debate do not come to fruition. If these people had their way, every immigrant, even people who have been lawfully present here for decades, would be kicked out of this country if they dare to criticize the Israeli government. Every social media platform would be forced to censor speech in support of Palestine. Every major pro-Palestinian organization would be subjected to witch hunts or even shut down for their advocacy for a just American foreign policy. So the Constitution, the rule of law, is the backstop against preventing those sorts of injustices, inshallah. But of course, there's nothing stopping the government from detaining people, from taking those initial steps that can really affect a person's life. Then it's up to lawyers, it's up to the courts to try to undo that damage. So it is true, yes, we are facing challenges, but the Constitution is still there. It's still holding, alhamdulillah. And as an attorney and alongside many other attorneys, we're working to make sure that when we have a new president, we don't have a new Constitution. The Constitution stays exactly.
Brother Ahmed, just doing research before we went on air, and I watched Matt Walsh's video, and I'm sure you also, probably saw something in the way he described that slaves and African American slaves played no role in the construction of America. And I laughed because I don't think he's understood the role of African Americans and those who were brought on chains to the so-called newfound world to create this nation. And that was the sort of humorous part, but also the sad part with regards to this. And many of the tones that he took was really Islamophobic when he said, or he asked the question, what has Islam done for the United States of America? And he tends to forget that from the 1700s and the 1800s, Islamic figures have really shaped the United States of America. And I think it's important to highlight the role that many of these Islamic figures have played in really the way America is today and the way the country is, and how Islamic history has really kept itself alive within the United States.
Yeah. Well, look, Matt Walsh is a very interesting figure, and I mentioned that debate going on in the conservative ecosphere about Israel first or America first. I read Matt Walsh's last book, and it's interesting because it takes a kind of a just the facts approach to every issue, which can be laudable, but that seems to have gone out the window whenever he's discussing issues related to American Muslims. He was under the impression that the founding fathers had no idea about Muslims, were not thinking about Muslims at all when they established religious freedom. That wasn't true. He thought that Muslims did not participate in America's earliest wars, like the Revolutionary War. That's not true. There are people with actual Arabic names who fought in the Revolutionary War. He thought that Muslims were not a long-standing presence in America. At least 1/3 of the enslaved human beings who were brought to America, who helped to build this country, were Black Muslims. And Islam was then beaten out of either them or their children, which is why Islam would never stay in the country after a generation or two. And he seems to ignore the fact that Muslims have played a very prominent role in American society, from the civil rights movement to sports entertainment. Muhammad Ali, do we have to pretend that he lives now? And so, I think that Mr. Walsh and others are suffering from what I would call, they are victims of propaganda that has been pushed by the Israeli government and its supporters. See, the Israeli government conducted a poll over the summer of Western nations, and they wanted to gauge, what do Western nations think of Israel in the wake of the genocide? And the poll found widespread negative views of the Israeli government. But the poll also found that the way to reverse that trend, the best way to restore positive views about Israel, was to distract Western nations with fear of Islam. with fear of Muslims. And that is why you've seen in America and in Europe over the past few months this very sudden and coordinated campaign to spread hysteria about Sharia, to spread hysteria about the Muslim next door, even though nothing has really happened to spark that. Even the Muslims who are running for office are incredibly liberal leftist people for the most part. You would hardly call them Muslim extremists. And so this is all hysteria that's being peddled by the Israeli government supporters because they have lost the argument over the genocide. And so they want to distract the American public by making them fear the Muslim next door, making them fear the Muslims advocating for a more just foreign policy, an America first foreign policy. And so, facts are facts, history is history. I think people like Matt Walsh, who claim to care about just the facts, should, open their eyes and do a little bit of reading and stop and think about who's benefiting from this propaganda that's being pushed on them and that they're propagating without much thought to it.
Brother Ahmed, in terms of Islamophobia in America, have we seen a slight decrease when it comes to that? I know that obviously, alhamdulillah, our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters in the US can still go to the masjid. They can still have propagation of Islam. Islamic education is still rife there. Masjids have not been, become places of unsafe environments. So alhamdulillah for that. But obviously when September 11th happened, the rise of Islamophobia really became at an all-time high with this sort of misinformation that every single Muslim that stays in the United States is perceived to be a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer. How do we assess Islam now as opposed to 2001 when those attacks happened in New York and in Pennsylvania and Washington?
Well, first, even before the 9/11 terrorist attacks, anti-Muslim bigotry existed in the United States. If you go back and watch any action movie from the 1980s, you'll often find a Muslim villain. When Timothy McVeigh perpetrated the Oklahoma City bombing, which was the worst domestic terrorist attack in our nation before 9/11, initially anti-Muslim hate groups, which still exist now, claimed that this had the hallmarks of an Arab act of terrorism, of a Muslim act of terrorism. So anti-Muslim bigotry has existed in America for a long time, but it was never as significant as it has become in the years after 9/11. Obviously, after al-Qaeda perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, anti-Muslim fear, anti-Muslim hostility rose. And that was predictable, right? If you're an American who is not a Muslim, you don't have any Muslim friends, and all you know about Islam, your first experience with Muslims is what you saw in 9/11. Obviously, you are going to have some negative feelings about Muslims. But I think most Americans, recognize that, look, what these 19 people in this terrorist group did obviously does not represent Islam, because we all know Muhammad Ali. We love Muhammad Ali. We know there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of Muslims who live in this country, have been here for decades, and have not done us any harm. And so if you look at polling, negative views about Muslims did not actually sharply rise after 9/11. I think most Americans gave the Muslim community some chance, some benefit of the doubt. But in the following 10 years, you saw anti-Muslim hate groups get very, very organized. They started spreading a very concerted anti-Muslim propaganda. The Muslims want to impose Sharia law, all this other nonsense that doesn't make any sense. And then you had, of course, the Iraq War, which created a lot of tension. You had more terrorist attacks. After the Iraq War, President Obama ran for office and was falsely accused of being a Muslim, which created more anti-Muslim conspiracy theories. And then, of course, this all culminates with ISIS running wild, Donald Trump calling for a ban on Muslim immigrants. So really, 10 years after 9/11, you started seeing in the polls a sudden increase in anti-Muslim sentiment that rose and rose and rose. And we started seeing a sharp rise in complaints to our civil rights group that only dropped for the first time in 2022, I believe. In 2022, our numbers finally started to drop in terms of complaints received. But after the October 7th attack and the start of the genocide in Gaza and all the anti-Muslim propaganda that was spread to try to silence activism for Palestinian human rights, you saw once again the anti-Muslim hate crimes and incidents rising sharply, Ahmed, and they've been rising since.
I have to stop you there because we have to go to a break. But after the break, we're going to be talking on Zohran Mamdani and how important is his race for the mayoral position in New York City. Do stay tuned. My conversation with Edward Ahmed continues after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Well, the hot discussion that is currently happening in New York City is that of the mayoral race between Zohran Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo. Zohran Mamdani, in the court of public opinion, seems to be in the driver's seat for that position. But of course, everything is decided by the polls. And still joining me, I have Edward Ahmed Mitchell, who is the Deputy Director on the Council on American and Islamic Relations. Brother Ahmed, I don't think I've ever seen a candidate of color really being so scrutinized in terms of his religion, in terms of his race, in terms of what he represents in the larger minority perspective. Not even Barack Obama went through this. Not even Kamala Harris went through this in last year's presidential elections. What is he doing right that is really ruffling the feathers of those within the far right and many of those who are sympathizing or aligned with the Zionist lobby group within the United States?
Well, first, let me note that as the Deputy Director of CAIR, our organization is a nonprofit, meaning we're a civil rights group. We don't engage in politics. We don't endorse candidates. We don't oppose candidates, and we don't speak positively or negatively of what candidates are doing. What I will say more broadly, and this applies to across the board, is that when Muslims run for office, they tend to face heightened scrutiny based on their religious identity. They tend to be asked to condemn things they have never said. They tend to be asked about their position on issues of foreign policy that have nothing to do with whatever they're running for, whether it's a city council seat, whether it's dog catcher. Muslims tend to be forced to answer for stereotypical issues that have nothing to do with the job that they want to serve in. Now, let's also note that people of color in America do face heightened scrutiny often. President Obama faced all manner of scrutiny because of his race, and also he had to face scrutiny because of false claims that he was a Muslim. So he was a victim of anti-Muslim bigotry, not being a Muslim. And even Vice President Harris, her race was questioned. She faced also hostility because of race and her gender. So it's not unique. People of color who run for office tend to face a heightened level of scrutiny, some level of bigotry. Obviously, when Muslims are running, and they're also people of color, they're facing a double whammy, right? It's not just that you're of a minority racial group, you are also of a minority religion that is loathed by some people on the right and the left. By the way, in America, you will find Democratic politicians expressing some anti-Muslim bigotry, and Republicans obviously as well. So it cuts across party lines, sadly. What I think we will see as it becomes more normal for Muslims to run for office and win office, and if Muslims are winning office despite attacks on their faith, eventually I think these attacks will become ineffective. People recognize that, oh, this isn't working anymore, that we have to actually address the issues and debate Muslim candidates on the issues they're running on, not based on their faith, not based on their religious background. So we're not there yet. Pretty much all Muslims running for office across the board are facing that sort of bigotry, that scrutiny. But I do think, God willing, inshallah, we'll get to a point where Muslims are judged based on the positions they take and not what their religious beliefs are.
Yeah, and I think the important part of this is really that, you know, for the first time, we have a Muslim candidate that's really going to say, he wants to make the difference within New York City. And of course, it's a city that has its fair share of challenges. How important is it that whatever he does in terms of the blueprint on the way he wants to run the city is done in a way that has the importance of Islamic values to it, so that there can be a sort of example for people to just see the beauty of Islam and this beauty within such an important leadership role? You've mentioned, of course, the organization that you represent is not there to endorse the candidate, but I think it's important to speak on it from an Islamic perspective.
So let me back in without speaking to his race in particular, but speaking broadly about Muslims who are running for office. So the challenge that I think Muslim Americans running for office face is that we have a two-party system, Republican and Democrat. And you can run as a third party, but generally speaking, almost every election is going to be won by a Republican or a Democrat. And when you run as a Republican or a Democrat, you're expected to toe the party line, to adopt whatever the major positions of that party are. And so, you know, if you look at the Muslim public sentiment, if you look at polls of the American people, very diverse political views. You'll find a lot of Muslims who are socially conservative, economically moderate, and peaceniks, liberals when it comes to foreign policy. You'll find other Muslims that are very liberal when it comes to social issues, kind of a live and let live attitude. Some Muslims who are very, very liberal on economic issues, and some are very conservative. Some who vote Republican for economic issues. So Muslims are really all across the board in terms of their political views here in America. And I think the challenge that American Muslims running for office face is, can they, number one, not give up their principles and give up their values to become accepted in politics, right? Can they avoid saying or doing things that just obviously contradict the basic values that we all as Muslims must believe in? And this is not unique to Muslims, whether you're a Christian running for office, a Jewish person running for office, even an atheist. Everyone has basic moral values they don't want to compromise in exchange for being in elected office. So I think the challenge Muslim Americans face is finding that balance of not giving up or contradicting their fundamental values, while also being willing to be flexible and compromise on things that are not fundamental, things that they can compromise on for the purpose of advancing a greater good. I'm not convinced that all Muslims running for office have struck that balance yet. You have seen, without naming specific names, some Muslims who go to extremes on the left or the right in order to become accepted to get elected. And that's unfortunate. I think there is room for Muslims to strike a balance in our politics, but it's difficult. It's a difficult road to navigate. Yeah. And I think Muslims will continue to experiment with that in the coming years.
Brother Ahmed, of course, within Congress, you have Ilham Umar and Rashida Tlaib. And obviously, it's a win for, the Muslim population within the United States, that there's some sort of representation within Congress. If we go back 40 or 50 years, we probably may have not have seen that occurring. How important is it that in the year 2025 that we have this representation that carries a sort of Muslim aspect to it? And of course, both of them have been outspoken against Israel with regards to the current genocide that we're seeing in Gaza and the occupation of Palestine as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I think we currently have 4 Muslim members of Congress.
Okay.
So Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Andre Carson, and the most recently elected out of California, Latifah Simon. And what's important is not just kind of the token representation of having Muslim around, but having Muslims who represent the best of our community, who reflect our community's values, our support for freedom, of justice, of fairness for all people, regardless of their faith. And so anytime you see Muslims in elected office standing up for what's right, that's a good sign. That's a good representation for the broader Muslim community, and it breaks down barriers that keep Muslims out of running for office, out of being elected to office. So it's always positive when you see principled Muslims serving in office, because, again, that opens the door for other American Muslims to run for office and make a positive change. Every community in America has gone through something similar, where first they are rejected, they're denigrated, they're not accepted. They spend time making money, building businesses. Then they build their houses of worship. They build schools for their kids. And then they start getting involved in politics, and they start to establish political presence, political power, to make sure their community is protected and that they're advocating for justice in their way for all people. So Muslims in America have done a great job of those first 3 things. We have lots of masajid, houses of worship. We have lots of private schools. We got lots of Muslim businesses, halal, all over the place in major cities. And now we're still in kind of the baby stages of building political presence, political power. Catholics have done it. The Jewish community has done it. The Italian community has done it. This is the history that you'll see for communities that are relatively new to America. Muslims are not new, but we're new in terms of presence. So we're in that stage right now.
You know what's interesting about that, what you just mentioned there, Brother Ahmed, is that here in South Africa also, there's a call for many of our young Muslims to get involved in politics. And, my question now comes to, regardless of the result of Zohran Mamdani's race for the New York mayoral position, how important is it that, Muslims within the United States take up politics, and not just for the status or the supposed I am into politics for the sake of it, but really making a solid change within the Muslim communities in the United States, whether it's in Michigan or Texas or anywhere else where there's a large Muslim population. What we see here in South Africa is that those Muslims that are involved in politics, serve as ward councillors in order to make sure that masajids are being built and that all regulations are kept, but also that the Islamic part of their lives are also kept at the same time. So I just want to get your take on that the involvement of youth within politics, but doing it to make sure that their communities are served in terms of basic service delivery aspects of it.
Well, it's so important for American Muslims to get involved in politics, not only by running for office, but by engaging with elected officials, by engaging in lobbying, by inviting elected officials to visit the masajid, right? It's a whole process. It doesn't just have to be running for office. If you're an American, you're paying taxes. You got the right to vote. You should be participating in the process and not just letting politicians do whatever they want with your taxpayer dollars. So that's something that we still have to improve upon as American Muslims. The other thing that's important is that, yes, it's perfectly fine for Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans, Christian Americans to obviously make sure that their community's rights are protected. But it's also important when you see Muslims running for office who are standing up for the rights of other people, of their neighbors, right? That's what we as Muslims are all about, is standing up for justice for all people. And so what's been really great about seeing young Muslims involved in politics is that a lot of them advocate actually for other communities and their rights more than even ours. So, for example, Rashida Tlaib was known not as being an advocate for Palestine when she was elected, but being an advocate for water rights, for protecting the rights of people in her district to access clean water in the wake of a horrific scandal that led to water poisoning of many people in her state. And so when you see Muslims speaking up not only for us, but also for their neighbors, that's really a great look for the community. It's a great representation of our way of life. And I think you're seeing that from young people in America. And again, as long as we can strike that balance of not advocating for things that clearly contradict our values, not engaging in quid pro quo activism, meaning you support my issue and I'll support your issue no matter how immoral it is. As long as we're being principled, standing for what's right in politics, that's a great thing. But if we can't do that, if we're not going to be principled, then we really shouldn't get involved in politics. Let someone else do it who's going to be brave enough to be principled.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Edward Ahmed Mitchell as we're going to be discussing and unpacking the United States' unwavering support for Israel during the genocide in Gaza. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. Well, the United States has been Israel's ardent and #1 supporter since the formation of the state in 1948, which of course coincided with the deadly Nakba that occurred this year. And the support for Israel has probably been even more since the start of the genocide on October the 7th, 2023. Brother Ahmed, there was something interesting I picked up when Donald Trump was doing his electioneering campaign, and he of course went to Michigan, where there's a large Arab American population within that state, and he of course promised the supporters there that he would end in his words, the war that was happening in Gaza. Of course, it happened a couple of weeks ago. We saw Israel violating the ceasefire. Was there a sense of disappointment, or was there no surprise that the genocide had continued even when he took office in January this year?
So a few things. One, the genocide started under President Biden's watch. The genocide was funded for 2 years under President Biden's watch. And what was so frustrating to, I think, many American Muslims is that, unlike others, President Biden claimed to support human rights. He claimed he would put human rights at the forefront of American foreign policy. He claimed he'd support peace and justice around the world. And he spoke up for the right of Ukrainians to be in peace. He spoke about many other issues. But when it came to Palestinians, but from the beginning of his administration, he was indifferent. He took no major steps to try to restart the peace process. He ignored numerous Israeli attacks and killings of innocent people, including covering up the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh. Yeah. The administration pressed to try to create a peace deal and other Abraham Accords that would have ignored a Palestinian state. So President Biden, first and foremost, who must be mentioned as the person who really created havoc and created more injustice by funding the genocide in Gaza when he should have and could have stopped it and freed all the hostages long before President Trump secured that deal. Now, when President Trump took office, the genocide actually stopped. So the day before he took office, a ceasefire was enacted, and that was really not because of Biden. It was because of President Trump sending his foreign policy guy, Steve Witkoff, over there to make a deal right before the president took office. And that deal held for a few months, but the genocide restarted because Netanyahu never wanted to stop it. He always wanted to restart the genocide. He threw away the ceasefire agreement, restarted the genocide, and sadly, President Trump went along with that for months and months and months, allowing the Israeli government to restart the genocide and starve countless people to death. Now, finally, the president intervened and stopped the genocide once again. But we still see the Israeli government killing people almost every other day, flouting the ceasefire, excuse after excuse to keep the massacres going. And so it's an open question whether or not this truly is the end of the genocide or just a pause in it.
Yeah. And the thing is, Brother Ahmed, when you look at Trump at this very moment, when he came in, I mean, he kept on saying, I'm going to end the wars that are currently happening in the world. Russia and Ukraine is still going on, even though there's, according to the US, a ceasefire that's happening. Israel still continues to bomb many parts within Gaza. And I, for one, was someone who actually bought into Donald Trump saying that he was going to end all of these wars. And yes, of course, he has reached places probably Joe Biden hasn't reached, speaking to Hamas to try and free Aiden Alexander, speaking to Khalil al-Hayya, one of the senior Hamas officials. I think it was Steve Witkoff who spoke to him. So one thought that they could still see a breakthrough with regards to that. And then you get statements from Trump saying that Israel can still defend itself when sort of skirmishes are happening in Gaza by militia groups which are backed by Israel. And that, for me, is the frustration with regards to that. Is that the frustration that many human rights advocates in the US feel, Muslims in the US feel, the Arab American population in the US feel, that no one really knows what Trump is thinking? Meanwhile, many lives continue to be lost in Gaza.
Well, look, President Trump is unpredictable, and I think he considers that an asset in foreign policy because no one knows what he's going to do, and all options are on the table. And so that goes for the Israeli government as well, which I think has been surprised by the few times in which he has spoken out against what they're doing, whether it was bombing Qatar or trying to restart the Iran war after a ceasefire was agreed. So, I look, any American president, you're going to find things that are deeply problematic. We saw it with President Biden. We've seen it with President Trump. I will say, though, that part of the problem is not necessarily him. It's that he has people around him who are extreme Israel first advocates who their first priority is protecting the Israeli government, supplying the Israeli government with weapons. That's not everyone around him, but that's a debate going on in MAGA world. And some of his major funders were Israel first extremists like the Adelson family. And so that's a tug and pull that's happening. I think the president would prefer there not be wars happening, there not be violence happening around the world. I think that's his preference, to be able to say that he has secured peace. But the question will be, is he willing to stand up to those people who want more war, who want the United States funding wars overseas, funding genocide overseas? Is he willing to really put America first? I don't think yet he has really been willing to put his foot down when push comes to shove. That's why the genocide went on for so long this year, even though it was obvious how to stop it, how to make a deal. And so, I think as American Muslims, we will continue to advocate for the president to fulfill what he said he was going to do, which is pursue peace around the world. And if he ever really does do that, it will be for the benefit of many people here and abroad. But I just can't emphasize enough that it's not a problem of just Republicans. Even within the Democratic establishment, you have people who speak like warmongers, who support war overseas, who are beholden to anti-Palestinian lobby groups like AIPAC. And so we really have to break the stranglehold that these lobby groups, whether it's the oil lobby, the anti-Palestinian lobby, the gun lobby, they have in our politics, the money they put into it. That's a big problem in America that we haven't quite fixed yet.
You mentioned AIPAC, Brother Ahmed. Do they still have a large influence within the United States at this moment? The reason why I'm asking is that I've spoken to many analysts and they say, well, AIPAC is starting to lose its foot within the American politics, within America's support for Israel. I wanted to get your take on that, because I still feel that they have a huge influence in the way Congress is run and decisions are made there. What's your take on it, Brother Ahmed?
Yeah. Well, first, let's talk about the American public. If you look at polls of the American people, they universally show that most Americans oppose the genocide in Gaza. Most Americans support ending unconditional U.S. military aid to Israel. And so that is a sea change in American public opinion. Now, our politicians have not yet caught up to American public opinion, and that is in large part because of the influence of anti-Palestinian lobby groups like AIPAC, which try to pressure our elected officials to do not what the American people want, but what the Israeli government wants, AIPAC being the major group that engages in that sort of lobbying. So they are still very powerful. They're still very influential among many members of Congress, but they are losing support, especially on the Democratic side of the aisle, where many elected officials or Democrats are starting to say, no, we're not going to take their money anymore. We're very critical of their ardent support for the Netanyahu government. So you are seeing open opposition to them that you would have considered impossible even 5 years ago. So yes, they are losing the support that they had. They are not as powerful as they once were, but they still have a significant influence. So do other anti-Palestinian voices. And so that's an ongoing struggle in America to make sure that our politicians are standing up for America, reflecting the values of the American people, not lobby groups that want us to fund more war, more genocide, more occupation, more oppression with our American taxpayer dollars.
You know, you speak of loose support. I've had conversations with Sami Hamdi, and of course we'll be speaking on him, you know, after the break. And he told me that the biggest shift came from many of the voices that were pro-Trump, pro-MAGA, pro-Israel. And those are, of course, the likes of Candace Owens, Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson. And he said that has swung the momentum in public opinion because people listen to them. In your view, Brother Ahmed, has that really been the big change, that podcasters like that, broadcasters like that, have really said, no, America's support for Israel needs to stop, and the atrocities, the genocide that we are seeing in Gaza is because the United States has just shipped weapons through to Israel, and there's no real accountability with regards to that?
The conservative outcry about this Israel first foreign policy has been an important part of American discourse. You have seen prominent conservative personalities, you know, wake up and go, wait a minute, this is not America first, this is Israel first. And for many of them, it was as simple as seeing pictures of children being killed every day for 2 years, you know, just struck their conscience and said, look, you know, they may say that they've supported Israel for years, but they know right from wrong. And they know killing children over and over again for 2 years deliberately is wrong. And so, you know, when you speak about some of the individuals you mentioned, that has made an impact on American discourse. Now, if you look at polls, most Republicans, most conservatives still support the Israeli government, but there is a significant minority of them who are increasingly critical of an Israel first policy. And among young conservatives, you definitely see a sea change coming in terms of views about the U.S. Unconditional support for Israel. The last thing I would say quickly is that the main reason that public opinion has changed is the ability for people to learn about what's happening for themselves through social media, right? Our mainstream media outlets are still very biased. Politicians are still very biased, right? You don't, if you just watch cable news, you don't get to see the horror that was inflicted in Gaza. But social media was the great equalizer. It allowed everyone, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, to see for themselves what was being done with our taxpayer dollars. And that led to the sea change in American public opinion. So yes, the podcast, the posting on social media, it may seem like, well, what is that going to change? It really did have a significant impact. And that's why you see anti-Palestinian billionaires trying to buy social media platforms now, trying to force social media platforms to censor speech because they don't want people to be able to see for themselves what the Israeli government is doing to Palestinians with American taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, and of course, added to that, the Ellison family, who wants to really merge two massive conglomerates within the media industry, and that, of course, they are ardent supporters of Israel. One final question, Brother Ahmed. Universities, especially the Ivy League universities, what we saw last year, what we saw this year, that was a massive momentum swinger, wasn't it? That many of the Jewish communities, and there have been so many of them that have said, not in our name, we are going to stand with those who support Palestine because it's a basis of human rights. How have educational facilities really played its role in telling the government that we are not going to stand and allow you to use the taxpayer monies of the United States to fund the genocide and fund the settler violence that is happening in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, respectively?
Well, like the college students who protested Vietnam, who protested segregation, who protested South African apartheid, college kids in America spoke up during the genocide last year. They launched peaceful encampments, they launched peaceful protests, and they called on their university to stop its financial entanglement with the Israeli government. And for speaking up, they were faced with police brutality. They were smeared as anti-Semites, even though many of them were Jewish students themselves speaking up against the genocide. And so sadly, it's not been the universities or colleges that showed courage. It was the students who showed courage. Most universities have bowed down to the government under Biden and the current administration, doing what they want to censor speech for Palestinian human rights, to punish their students for speaking up for Palestinian human rights, and even to give up some of their academic freedom to satisfy the government. And so that's partly why you've seen a significant drop in the number of protests happening on college campuses over the past school year, because kids were suppressed. Kids were kicked off campus. Kids were sometimes violently shut down for daring to speak up. But the kids won the argument. The kids won the argument. Most Americans now recognize the kids were right all along. Most Americans support the policies the kids were advocating for. And so even though they were violently shut down, they still won. They still won the argument.
After the break, I wrap up my conversation with Edward Ahmed Mitchell. We're going to be speaking on the role of ICE agents within the United States and, of course, the latest abduction of Sami Hamdi, the British political commentator, and just how concerning that is. Do stay tuned. The conversation wraps up after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, as you have known, of course, ICE agents had detained and, of course, are about to deport Sami Hamdi. Of course, Sami Hamdi toured us here in South Africa. And again, this really speaks of the concern when it comes to freedom of speech within the United States. Brother Ahmed, I know obviously the Center for American and Islamic Relations has issued a statement really condemning what had happened with Sami Hamdi. And again, it really is quite a concerning aspect with regards to this, because he never really came out and criticized the American government or the American way of life. All he was saying was his criticism of Israel. And of course, this landed him to where we are right now.
Look, the great irony of what we've seen over the past year is that almost all of the college students who were arrested for their speech were not arrested for criticizing the United States. They were arrested because they criticized a foreign government. And so there are people all across America who criticize America, and they're not getting thrown in jail. But it's criticizing Israel that is the red line that immigrants apparently cannot cross. Now, in Sami Hamdi's case, he's been to America many times for speaking tours. He's a British journalist, well known. He came into the country on a valid visa, no problem at all. He was only targeted after far-right anti-Muslim extremists launched a social media campaign against him. And then he was picked up in California and detained in the middle of his speaking tour. And so this is, lawless. I mean, in America, once you're here, the government cannot punish you for your speech. The right of free speech applies to everyone in the country. Now, if you're not here, the government has all sorts of authority over who they are going to let into the country, right? If you don't have any legal status in America, they don't have to let you into the country. But once you are here on our soil with legal status, you cannot be punished simply because of your speech. And if you could be punished because of your speech, you could be punished because of your religion. I mean, there are all sorts of things the government could do to you if the Constitution doesn't apply to immigrants, but it does apply to people who are immigrants, who are travelers. And so that's the fundamental debate we're having here, is that the government seems to think that they can throw a legal traveler or a legal immigrant in jail because they said something the government doesn't like. And we say no. The First Amendment applies to everyone on American soil. So Sami Hamdi is in good spirits. Our team, CAIR California, met with him a few days ago. They filed legal action to try to prevent his deportation based on this unconstitutional reasoning. I'm sure he wants to go home. I'm sure he'll be happy to go home at the right time, but not because of some unconstitutional, illegal attempt to punish him for his speech.
Brother Ahmed, I want to touch on the role of ICE agents, and I want to throw a bit of humor here because Dean Cain, of course, played Superman. You know, he became an ICE agent, and I thought, okay, anybody can become an ICE agent as long as they can go ahead and, you know, support the ways of Donald Trump and the ideologies of Donald Trump. But there have been concerns, and I've had many Americans come onto the show, be it whether they are, you know, Caucasian Americans or Arab Americans, and they've really voiced concerns when it has come to the role of ICE agents. Are they being used as a tool to really scare the American people, whether it's anti-immigration policy or that of freedom of speech?
Look, every nation has immigration officers. Every nation protects its border to some extent, right? No one would begrudge any government the right to protect its border and to have a say in who is coming into its country. That's a very basic right that every government has. The problem that we're seeing with ICE agents is that they are being weaponized and used to target people based on their ethnicity. You know, you've seen ICE grabbing people up because they are speaking Spanish in a group outside of Home Depot, assuming that they must be here illegally. They're going after people who are not committing crimes, who are simply here in an undocumented status, instead of going after people who might be actual criminals who've committed some real heinous things that should lead them to be prosecuted and sent out of the country. And they're also being weaponized to target people who speak up for Palestinian human rights, which is not the point of ICE, to target people who are here legally simply because they spoke up in criticism of a foreign government. And when ICE is grabbing people, they're doing it in a very dangerous, lawless way. They often have masks on so you can't see their face. They're not wearing uniforms. They're wearing plain clothing. And they're grabbing people. They grabbed a Muslim woman, Rumeysa Ozturk, on the street outside of her apartment. And it looked like a kidnapping. Like if she was, you know, if she could have been perfectly reasonable to think she was being kidnapped and to run for her life, right? Because when you see a masked man coming out of nowhere to grab you, your first thought is not, oh, this is a police officer. Your first thought is, I'm being kidnapped. And so it's very dangerous what they're doing. I think many Americans are upset about it because they recognize that, yes, you have the right to police your borders, to have a say over who's coming to the country, but you don't have the right to flout the law, to engage in racial or religious discrimination, or to punish people who are illegally here because of their speech.
Brother Ahmed, and you know, I want to bring the Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Ozturk example to this because, you know, when that had happened, I thought at that very moment that America was slipping into a state of supposed authoritarianism at that time. And I want to quote Stephen Levitsky, who was a professor at Harvard, and he said that healthy democracies can sometimes slip into an authoritarian state. We're not there, are we, in terms of the way America's run at this moment, because there are counter, you know, reports to Stephen Levitsky that says the democracy of America will always out-Trump, pardon that word, any American leader that wants to supposedly use the Constitution to their own well-being. What is your take on that?
Well, look, the Constitution is only as good as the people who are upholding it and protecting it, right? And so it's not an eternal document. It's not the Holy Bible. It's not the Holy Quran. It is a document that has to be protected by people, by human beings, by the political officials who swear an oath to uphold it, by the judges who swear an oath to enforce it, by those of us who are lawyers who try to make sure that we are holding our government accountable. And so if it was not for the rule of law, I think you could have seen America slide even more so into what really could be seen as an authoritarian state where free speech does not exist at all. But right now, Mahmoud Khalil is free. Rumeysa Ozturk is free. Right now, the American people can still criticize the Israeli government because of the rule of law, because the Constitution has not fallen apart yet. Thank God, alhamdulillah. And so it's up to us, the people of the United States, to make sure that we do not let any politician, whether a Democrat or Republican, shred the Constitution, especially for the benefit of a foreign government. There are absolutely people in this country who are Israel first, who would throw the Constitution in the trash in order to defend the Israeli government. But I don't think that is what most Americans want. I don't even think that's what President Trump wants. And so I think it's on us to make sure that we win the argument for America over Israel, for justice over injustice, for free speech over the suppression of speech.
One final question, Brother Ahmed, to wrap up this conversation. The strength of Islam within the United States of America at this moment, how is it growing as we see Islam continue to grow from a global perspective? And of course, you know, everyone knows that it's the fastest growing religion right now within the world. But the beauty of America is that there's such great figures that are there that have made Islam what it is right now. You know, we speak of Muhammad Ali, we speak of Malcolm X. There are so many other individuals who do not come to mind right at this moment, and maybe you can add to that. But how healthy as we sit right now is Islam within the United States of America?
Look, the American Muslim population is consistently growing, not only because people having families, but because of converts to Islam. Despite all the anti-Muslim propaganda, every year you see many, many people embracing Islam in America, embracing the belief in the oneness of God, of worshiping and praying to God and God alone, acknowledging all the prophets from Adam to Noah, Ibrahim, Musa, Moses, Isa, Jesus, and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see many Americans recognizing that this is not a foreign, unfamiliar religion. This is the way of life that I wanted to believe and practice in from the time I was young, worshiping God and God alone. So you see Islam continuing to grow despite all the hate, all the challenges, all the discrimination that Muslims sometimes face. I will say the biggest challenge I believe Muslims face is not discrimination, not the threat from the government. It's whether or not we will hold on to our faith generation after generation. Many communities in America that were once very religious became secularized. They became nominally religious. They were once very going to their house of worship all the time, believing all the time, but they gave up their religion, sadly, because America is a melting pot in many positive ways, but also it can melt down your culture. It can melt down your faith, and you can give it up a few generations down the line. So I think the really important thing for us in our community will be, will we hold on to those values, to the practice of our faith in future generations, or will we give up our faith, our principles to get along, to be popular? I think that what's happened, the pressure we face, the attacks we face, has made people even more dedicated to being publicly, visibly, devoutly Muslim. But that is the big challenge for us. It's not the government, it's not discrimination. It's, are we going to be faithful servants of God, no matter what is happening to us? And may Allah make it easy for all of us to do that. Challenges with anything severe.
Inshallah. I mean, you know, it's the interesting part, just to close things off, you know, we've had a lot of American Muslims coming here, and they just appreciate how South Africa has really spread Islam. And they've taken examples here of South Africa to try and go ahead and do the same propagation within the United States of America. And alhamdulillah, you know, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to grow Islam in the United States of America. Brother Ahmed, absolute pleasure having you on. Shukran so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.
The absolute pleasure. That is Edward Ahmed Mitchell. He is the Deputy Director on the Council for American-Islamic Relations. That's all we have for you here on Talking Point. From myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. If you've missed today's episode, be sure to find it on our YouTube channel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.